My name is Robert Winters. I'm president of the McGill Community for Lifelong Learning. I would like to welcome you to part 4 of this groundbreaking lecture series that marks a new collaboration between MCLL and the McGill University Retiree Association, or MIRA. Before we start today's session, I would like to remind us that McGill University is on land which has long served as a site of meeting and exchange amongst Indigenous peoples, including the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe nations. We acknowledge and thank the diverse Indigenous peoples whose presence marks this territory on which peoples of the world now gather. I would like to introduce Dr. Auntie Padjan, President of MIRA, who has been crucial in helping build MCLL's relationship with his important group representing retired McGill employees. At McGill since 1976, Auntie is a professor in pharmacology and therapeutics. He has done research in neuroscience, pharmacology, therapeutics, and also clinical research on alcoholism. And he also has 30 years of experience using information technology to manage patient care in intensive care units and in medical education. He's the founder and director of I Medici de McGill, an orchestra that plays classical music with a professional conductor. The next concert is a benefit for people suffering from the war in Ukraine on May 19. Auntie has organized this series of presentations on behalf of our 2 organizations. Today's session is the 4th, and the remaining presentation is not to be missed either. Auntie.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you very much for this introduction. It's always a great pleasure to get together with MCLL and do something that seems to be of use to our community. Both of our societies, associations are dedicated to this type of activities, and I'm glad that we have found some common ground in this series, which has been entitled Mental Health. So the question is, what are we going to do today as part of the whole person care? So, Dr. Hutchinson is finished medical school, National University of Ireland, came to McGill, finished specialty in oncology and nephrology, but essentially has not stopped learning. So after this initial clinical experience, he became interested in other things that led to this whole person care. And he finished 4 years of psychiatry course in family therapy. He later joined forces with Balfour Mount in palliative care. And last 10 years, he has been director of whole person care unit at McGill, which really is a very special, shall we say, center of activities related to what is whole person care, which we are going to hear in a short while. In some sense, this is an answer to a development of medicine that in the last 40, 50 years has become, shall we say, very much under control of technology rather than some other ideas. And one of the very important ideas that has been now put back in the medicine by the activities of Dr. Hutchinson and his group is that we really have to think about medicine as dealing with healing, not even therapy. I mean, therapy, in some sense, in the last 60, 70 years, has been, I would say, corrupt by early success of antibiotics, which sort of established an idea that, in fact, we have to find a magic bullet and it will treat almost everything. Well, I don't want to continue musing about therapy and healing. I would appreciate Dr. Hutchinson to give us his views of this thing, and he has plenty of things to do. I also want to say that he has published the first book on.
Oh, I think he froze again. Auntie, you're having problems with your internet.
Have to call again.
Okay.
Thank you for reminding me.
So maybe we should ask Dr. Hutchinson to start.
That's what I said, but nobody heard.
Oh, we didn't hear you. So
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Yes, Dr. Hutchinson, it's all yours.
Thank you.
So thanks so much. So thanks so much to Ante for inviting me, and to the two organizations that are sponsoring this. And it's really an honor to speak to you. And I hope I can tell you something interesting about some developments in teaching at McGill Medical School, really over the past 20 years and developing over that period. To say that we're not going to use the chat, so when there are questions, I'd like you to use that reactions raised hand function, and I'll call on you. I'm going to speak for a bit, have some questions, and then speak for another bit and finish with questions. Okay, let me just share my screen. So can you see the title of my talk? Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Whole person care, relationship, and the iceberg metaphor. I have no conflict of interest. I want you to think about the last time you went to see a doctor with a complaint. So if you like, this is you, the patient, coming to see this clinician or doctor. And my question to you is, think about what was the main thing you wanted to know from that doctor? Now, there might have been many things, but I would say one central thing, one crucial thing, is that you wanted the following process. You wanted to know, what is it? So I have a pain in my shoulder. What is that? Is that something serious? Is it not? Is this a sign of an old disease come back? Is this some new threat? And so on and so on. If you've got a sore throat, you may want to know, is this COVID? Or no, maybe it's just a regular cold, and so on. A crucial part of medicine, and one of the main reasons that patients come to see doctors is they have a complaint, they're not sure what it is, and they want to know. First step, the diagnostic process. The second step, which almost all of us want also, is the following. We want this clinician to do something about this problem that we have. We hope that it's an easily, quickly fixable problem. And medicine is good at that. It's gotten better at that. Ante mentioned antibiotics, but so many things that we can now do for different diseases that we couldn't do in the past. Most of medical school is teaching students how to diagnose disease, how to treat disease. We're always going to do that. It's a crucial part of medicine. It's a huge part of why people want to see us. However, there's another part of medicine. And that part is this part on top here, this healing. This is our innate ability to respond, to grow even, in response to disease. And what we need to realize is that clinicians, they can't make that happen, but they can certainly get in the way. and they can certainly facilitate that process. So when patients complain about doctors, they don't mostly complain about this part, the curing part. They mostly complain about this doctor didn't listen to me, he didn't respect me, he didn't take time, he didn't seem to care, and so on and so forth. So what we are saying is we need to start to pay attention again to both of these parts of medicine. Let me give you some simple definitions, fairly obvious. So curing is an action carried out by a healthcare practitioner to eradicate a disease or correct a problem. It could be also to control a pain. All of that we put under the rubric of healing, of curing. Healing is a totally different thing. Healing is a process leading to a greater sense of integrity and wholeness in response to injury or disease that occurs within the patient, but it can be facilitated by a healthcare practitioner. The realization that this is a crucial part of medicine, which had been kind of left aside with the development of scientific and technological medicine, the realization how important this was came out of the palliative care movement, and particularly Balfour Mount and Michael Kearney. Because here's what they noticed. They had patients who were dying of their disease, physically getting worse, and yet spiritually, emotionally, their subjective quality of life was actually improving. And people see this all the time in palliative care. It's one of the reasons that palliative care is such a hopeful, surprisingly in a way, hopeful specialty, because you see people healing. This can be to do with their relationship with themselves, their relationship with their families, the meaning they give to their lives, and so on and so forth. It's a very real phenomenon. Balfour Mount describes one patient that kind of epitomizes this process. It's a guy called Chip. He'd been on the Canadian ski team, successful businessman, and then developed a testicular cancer. They treated the cancer in every way they could, and it didn't work. Cancer spread. He's getting sicker and sicker. He's losing weight. About a week before he dies, he gets married to his fiancée. And Bal has a conversation with him around that time. And what Chip says to him, Bal, this has been the greatest year of my life. And Bal says to him, how could that be? You know, here's this guy who was on the ski team. He was successful. He was healthy. And here he's just losing weight, getting sicker. And he says, how could that be, Chip? And basically Chip says, up to this point, my life has been directed outwardly. And now I got in touch with my inner life. And that has made all the difference. That is the kind of process we're talking about. That's the kind of healing that can occur, even when disease is overwhelming. I said that Mount and Kearney and some others are the people who kind of put healing back into medicine. This distinction between curing and healing, however, is not a new one. Here's a mosaic from the Greek island of Kos. Kos is where Hippocrates, so-called father of modern medicine, was born and practiced. And what you see here on the right side is you see a patient, a Greek patient, coming to see a doctor. But what you'll notice is he's coming to see two doctors. This doctor here on the bright side of this big rock, that represents Hippocrates. This guy here is Asclepius, the Greek god of healing. So what happened apparently when a Greek patient in the classical era got very, very sick, They went to a temple devoted to Asclepius. Something happened. They slept in the temple. There was something to do with dreams and snakes. We don't really understand it all, but the purpose was healing, because Asclepius was the Greek god of healing. On their way in and out of this temple, they would be contacted by people like Hippocrates, who would attempt to fix whatever could be fixed. So the Greeks were very clear about this fixing part of medicine, represented here, and this healing part of medicine represented here. Okay. Here are those two parts again. And we would say, well, what is whole person care? It's the simplest kind of idea in the world in a way, not necessarily easy, but in principle simple. It's the combination of fixing, curing what can be cured, and promoting healing or a healing relationship with the patient. And if you think about it, I don't think you would ask anything else of the physician that sees you. Both are important. And so we put that circle about them, and we call that whole person care. Let me just have a look, see where I go next. Yeah, okay. So what I'm going to talk about for the rest of the talk really is, well, how do we teach this? And we start with a very simple idea from the work of Virginia Satir, famous family therapist. I met her a long time ago, first person to bring actual families into therapy. She had lots of good ideas, but one of them was the following. Virginia said, whenever you meet or interact with another person, there's always yourself, there's the other person, and there's the context. What she also said, which is extremely important, is that under stress, unconsciously, you'll leave out parts of that to the detriment of the relationship. And she outlined 4 main ways in which you do that. First, placating stance, this one here, where you leave yourself out. So what we have found is that doctors and medical students adopt all of these 4 stances, and let's just go through them. Placating stance, I'm not important, it's the patient who's important. It's a good place to start. Many medical students start there. And yet, if you forget about yourself completely, you're not really there for the patient in the way that they want. If I'm just somebody who tells you yes, 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 whatever you want, it's not really me giving my full self. Also, very importantly, if I suppress myself in this way for a long time, I'm not important, very hard to maintain, and often leads to a kind of suppressed anger, which we do see in medical students. Okay, placating stance. Sometimes people get so fed up with the placating stance that they move to the opposite stance, this blaming stance. That's where I'm the one who knows. I'm the one who knows what should happen. You're the one who have to fit in to my framework. Do we do this in medicine? Absolutely. You know, sometimes we call patients non-compliant or dysfunctional or personality disorder or that dysfunctional family in the corner. It could be true, some of it. But what we're doing, though, is that we're basically disenfranchising, invalidating the person who's in front of us by putting labels on them. These first 2 stances, placating and blaming, have a certain amount of emotion in them. The placating stance kind of suppressed emotion, but often underlying some anger after a while. The blaming stance, more overt emotion, often anger. And somewhere in medicine, and nobody ever wrote a paper about this, and we don't really know how it happened, but I think we decided in medicine, we do not want emotion involved at all. So what we would like to do is we'd like to get rid of emotion. And in other words, get rid of people completely, be much simpler. And so we don't favor these two stances as much as this third stance, the super reasonable stance, where I forget about myself as a person, I forget about you as a person, and I become a pure problem solver. When we ask students, do you ever see that? They see it all the time. So it's the kind of thing where a neurologist is talking about the location of a stroke, where in the brain is the stroke, discussing with residents at the bedside of a patient who's just had a stroke. He's not understanding, he or she is not understanding. This patient is going to be very much disturbed by this conversation. He's kind of disowned this person as a person, and really also disowned him or herself as a person. Because if I'm really in touch with my sense of myself, I'm not going to do that. We've lost ourselves, we've lost the other person, we've lost both. What's left to lose? Everything. And this is the distracting stance. And we ask students, do you ever see that? Absolutely they do. And what they see is doctors walking into a room and making jokes that are completely inappropriate. They just have nothing to do with them, the other person, or the context. A recent example that one of the students gave us. So a pediatric surgeon about to go in to do a circumcision on a baby. The family are there and the medical students are there. The surgeon says to the medical students, "Come watch me mutilate another child." It's kind of like an awful joke. It's not funny to anybody. And yet that happens. You can do it with joking. People do it with hyperactivity or multitasking, so much so that they're not really there. And sometimes with alcohol and drugs, which is a problem in medicine. So 4 typical ways that people unconsciously don't fully engage in a relationship. And so what we're trying to teach medical students is, can you be, I just want to show, sorry, I've just kind of show you, these things also come with physical stances. It's not that people actually adopt these stances every time they do the psychological stance, but it kind of puts people in touch with what we're talking about. So placating stance, down on one knee, hand over your heart, apologizing. Most of us who've been in long-term relationships have done that at some point. Laming stance, hand on your hip, pointing at somebody, don't ever do that again. Super reasonable stance, I'm in my head. And here's an example of distracting where I'm so multitasking, I'm not really there. Okay. Our aim is for medical students, as far as possible, to be what we would call congruent. Present to themselves, not losing touch with themselves. In touch with the other person as a person, and also very much aware of the medical and other context, all 3 at the same time. Okay. So we are teaching this to medical students. And one of the approaches that we're using that's helpful for doing this is a word that you'll be very familiar with, I think, and has to do with how do we control our attention and awareness? Because this is very much about how do I be in control of what I'm paying attention to? And the term I'm talking about is mindfulness. So here's a definition from Kabat-Zinn. The awareness that arises from paying attention on purpose and non-judgmentally, very important, to the present moment as it unfolds from moment to moment. So we know that it's really a struggle with all of us to stay aware of ourselves, the other person, and the context. And that mindful training is a way of getting us better at being in the moment as the moment, one moment goes to the next, and so on. And so if we were to summarize, what are we trying to teach medical students? I would say it's the following. We're trying to teach them whole person care. And to teach them that, we superimpose on this diagram that congruence diagram. And we want them to be mindful. And so what we're teaching, I would say, is mindful clinical congruence. Moment-to-moment attention to the patient as a person, oneself as a person, and the clinical context as it unfolds from moment to moment. Those are the main ideas. The next part of my talk is to do with, well, how do you actually teach that? That's what we're trying to teach. But how do you teach that? So in second year, as I mentioned, in groups of 20 students, we teach a course called Mindful Medical Practice, which is about teaching them exactly what I've told you. Here's a picture of students arriving for the first class. So we're sitting in a circle. This is my colleague, Stephen Lieben, who teaches this. I do, and some other people do. We sit in a circle, no desks, no computers, no cell phones on, and we explore, do exercises, but give them an experience of what we're talking about. Because the stuff I'm telling you about today, you can understand it when it's explained, but to actually have a sense of what it entails, how you can actually do this, for that you need experiential teaching, and that's what we're trying to do. That's what we are doing, I think. First class. I'm not going to give you all 7 classes, but here's a piece from the second class. You can see students acting out. This student, where my pointer, this student here acting out the blaming stance, this student the placating stance. We change around to give them a sense of what this is. We explore this further in later classes where we actually do role plays where students act out a patient, doctor, and then a doctor in different stances. So they get a sense of what does that feel like? And then the challenge, but also the what opens up when you decide to try and become congruent. Okay. I said it was 7 classes, and here's what we address in the 7 classes, starting with how do you control your attention and awareness? Second class about congruent communication, those stances. How does this relate to decision-making? How does awareness relate to decision-making? Which it does in a very subtle and complex way. In the 4th class called Clinical Congruence, we actually do role plays of some students acting out a non-congruent stance and another student congruent stance. What's amazing is how good a job students without, simply in second year, when they decide to try and do that, how good a job they can do in relating to somebody congruently. Then we deal with the issue of resilience, and that's an important point. People think that the difficulty in medicine is relating to people who are very sick, and that is a difficulty. They assume that the answer to that difficulty is in some way to distance yourself or put up a barrier of some kind. And we would say that's absolutely the wrong answer, because the benefit of medicine for doctors and for patients is that this is a human relationship. That if I relate to you in a way that really allows me to touch you as a person, I get touched as a person. It's energizing. And so part of resilience is, how do you stay in touch with patients so that it's energizing? How do you respond to suffering, which is, of course, a key part of medicine? One thing to mention there, and it's not, I don't think it's an accident that palliative care seems to be able to relate in a way that can incorporate both curing and healing. Palliative care is dealing with patients who are believed to be dying. It's impossible to be in palliative care without, in some ways, facing your own mortality. We believe that part of the problem with medicine is that instead of doctors being willing to face their own vulnerability and mortality, they're running away from it, they're denying it, they don't want to be there, and that prevents them being fully with their patients. I know that threat because quite late in my career, I'd done nephrology for a long time. I thought about going into palliative care. And my thought was, oh my gosh, I don't know if I can do that. Can I really be at the bedside of a patient that I know and acknowledge is dying? And then the next patient will be dying, and the next, I'll become depressed. That put me off doing it for quite a while. Then I did it, I started to do it, and I found I was completely wrong. It's true, it can be anxiety-provoking, not depressing. In fact, the most rewarding kind of medicine I had ever done. In that class on responding to suffering, we actually get students to face their own mortality. And what they find out of doing that is, rather than turning them off, it actually opens them up. It actually puts them in touch with what's really important to them. I think medicine needs to do a lot more of that, helping doctors get in touch with their own vulnerability and mortality, and therefore what's really important to them. Okay, the last class is mindful congruent practice in clerkship and beyond. We get them to think about, well, when you think about clerkship, which is the next part of their training, and we give them a way to kind of get in touch with themselves in response to that new challenge, new opportunity, however you want to put it. Okay. And now, I've been talking a lot about ideas. I would now like to give you the opportunity to do a little bit of work on yourselves, if you're willing. And we're going to use something which we use with the students. We said that the aim is to be congruent, which is to be aware of myself, aware of the other person, and present to the context. But to do that, you really need to be able to get in touch with yourself at a somewhat deeper level. And here's the metaphor that we use. And it's a metaphor. It's not necessarily, this is true, not true. It's a way of getting in touch with something. It also comes from the work of Virginia Satir. And what Virginia said was, you know, all we see of people mostly is that little piece of the iceberg above the waterline, their actions, their expression maybe. What we don't see are a whole set of layers below that, which are crucial to how they are being. My suggestion to you, I'm going to bring you through one exercise of the iceberg as I see it for me, or in a particular context. And then I would ask you, if you have a chance, can you get some paper, draw this picture, and then we'll bring you through your iceberg. Okay. Start by my iceberg. At the time that I began to think about giving this talk, and we're going to start at the bottom. longings and yearnings. So what are longings and yearnings? Those are those kind of deep things that are so important to us. Sometimes we're longing for home, we're longing to be loved, we're longing for love. What was I longing for when, oh, what could I get in touch with when I hear from Ante, I want you to give this talk? You know, probably what I'm longing for is to be appreciated, for somebody to tell me, oh, this is a good thing. But maybe longing at a deeper level to be able to touch people in some way, to be able to say something that's authentic for me, and so therefore it will touch people in an authentic way. Something like that. It's very difficult to get in touch with our longings. It's embarrassing because they're always a bit vulnerable. And they're the engine that really drives us. So what we're trying to do with our medical students is, how do we get in touch with the longings and yearnings that really drive them to want to be doctors or to be good doctors? Next step, expectations. That's when we turn our longings and yearnings into, you know, what we expect, concrete things. What did I expect with this talk? Well, I thought that I'm sure it'll work technically. I think people will be interested. I expect some people will be more interested than others. The big expectation that I always have before a talk is, and it won't turn out exactly like I expect. That's a guarantee. And that's often a very good thing. You know, like say Jeff or Trudy's question or comments earlier, I couldn't anticipate those. And yet that's exactly why doing live things is so interesting. So you always have to expect it's going to be different, and exactly the same is true when you interact with a patient. It's never exactly as you expect. Perceptions. My perceptions were, this is an opportunity to tell people about whole person care. It's a good opportunity. I didn't have any bad perceptions about it at all. I thought this is good. Perception. No, that was it mainly for perceptions. Feelings. Feelings. One feeling I had was definitely anxiety. I always have anxiety before talks. It's just normal. I find that's a good thing. It gets me awake. Fear. Some fear that, oh, maybe it won't work. Maybe what I'll say won't sound good. And related to fear, I would say shame. Even kind of, Tom, do you really have enough to say here? Are you sure you have something interesting to say that these people will want to hear? So also I would say, though, excitement, delighted to be asked and feeling, oh yeah, this will be good. I'm sure I can get this across. So kind of a mix of feelings. Feelings about feelings. Probably some fear about the negative feelings. I don't want to be overwhelmed by those. And then about the positive feelings, a feeling of energy and excitement. And then what stance did I adopt? I don't think I was either blaming, placating, super reasonable, or distracted. I think mostly, but not completely, but mostly congruent, like present to myself, present to Ante when I was talking to him, and then hopefully present to you and aware of a context. Okay. Here's my challenge to you. Can you think of something in your future that is in some ways important to you, that you're maybe somewhat excited about, a transition, a change of some kind? It could be going on vacation. It could be a new course you're going to take. It could be a new job. It could be a new retirement. Many things. For Ante, it could be a new concert that the Medici is going to give. And here's the most difficult part. And if you've drawn it, great. If you haven't drawn it, we can still go through it. Here's the most difficult part. When you think about that challenge, what longings and yearnings do you think are there? I'll give you a few moments. Are you longing to be appreciated, to be loved, have an exciting time, to learn something important for yourself? You won't have to share this with anybody. See, can you just write down for yourself, what do you think you're longing for? Next step. What are you expecting? Often our expectations are a mixture of positive and negative. You might be expecting, oh, this will really work. Or, oh, this may have more challenges than I think. Or there may be, there are various obstructions I can see. I expect that they may get in the way. What do you expect? And now, how do you see it overall? Like this transition, this thing you're going to do, whatever it is, do you see it as a challenge, an adventure, something to get through? How would you frame it to yourself? And it might be a mixture of things. And next, what feelings do you have when you get in touch with the longings, the expectations, the perceptions? Are you feeling afraid? Are you feeling excited? Are you feeling sad? Are you feeling guilty? Maybe you shouldn't be doing this thing. Are you feeling ashamed? Maybe you're not good enough to do this thing. Are you feeling anger? What feelings can you write down in relationship to this change that you're going to take on, or this transition? And next, you're going to have feelings about those feelings. For instance, some people, when they get angry, get scared because they're scared of their anger. Are you afraid of these feelings? Are you excited by those feelings? Are you ashamed of those feelings? And so on. Are you feeling guilty about feeling that way? See if you can write down some feelings about feelings. And finally, coping. What stance do you think you're adopting in relation to what's going to happen? And so the 4 stances again: placating. Have I lost touch with myself? Am I just thinking about other people? Blaming. Am I totally in touch with myself and simply annoyed at other people because they don't see the point and they don't seem to want me to do what I want to do? Super reasonable. Am I out of touch with my emotions? And am I simply dealing with this as a technical problem to be solved? Or distracting. Maybe it's too difficult to even touch on this. I'm not in touch with any of this. Or am I congruent? In touch with myself, in touch with other people and aware of the context. If you want to get a clue and you're having difficulty deciding, well, what stance am I in, do I think? I would say here's a little bit of a guide. If you are mostly in touch with your expectations, what should happen, you're probably more likely in a blaming stance. People in a blaming stance are perfectly aware of what should happen from their perspective, what they expect. Maybe you're in a blaming stance. If you can easily get in touch with your feelings, it may mean, it doesn't necessarily mean, you could be congruent, but you could also be placating, because people who suppress their feelings and in a placating stance are often feeling a lot of stuff. If it's easy for you to express your perceptions, how do I see this? Maybe you're in a super reasonable stance. Maybe. And finally, if you can't get in touch with any of this, you're probably in a distracting stance. And I would say the key to congruence, which is what we teach medical students, is can you get in touch with or stay in touch with your deepest longings and yearnings? Those are the best motor or guide to keep you in touch with yourself and with the other person. It's an interesting thing. When we do this with medical students, they all do this in relation to clerkship, which is just coming up. And we get them to share it with each other, which I'm not going to ask you to do. What they find is so surprising is they assume that they're isolated and that they're the only ones feeling as they're feeling. And when they share it with another person, and then in the larger group we talk about it, they realize, oh my gosh, we're all feeling very much the same way. Not identically in differences, but many things shared. So one of the effects of what teaching, I think, is not just to teach them a way of being or a skill. We also put them in touch with each other in a way that they haven't been before. And I think that's the key to producing doctors who can get in touch with other people. And we see this in essays. When at the end of this course, students write an essay telling us what it was like. And a lot of what they say is, one of the benefits of this course is I got to know my colleagues in ways I never had before. And they see the value of that human contact, which is the same human contact we want them to have with their patients. To mention, we've written a book about this course, and so that other people can teach it, tells you how to do it moment to moment, and so on and so forth. It came out, I think, 3 years ago or so. Available at McGill. McGill Library has it. You can get it for free if you want. You can download it, I think, for free. You certainly read it for free.